I'd like everyone to meet the man who's been living off my money for the last 6 years. The words landed before I even understood I was the target. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her, that maybe she meant somebody else at the table, somebody I didn't know. Then I saw her looking right at me, and I knew there was no mistake. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Not everyone. Enough. Enough to make the back of my neck go hot. I sat at a long table inside a banquet hall at the Whitfield Hotel outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, watching my son-in-law's mother hold a champagne glass like she was about to make a toast. Her name was Carol. She was smiling the way people smile when they think they've just said the funniest thing in the room. "This is Walter," she said, "my daughter-in-law's father." A few polite nods. Carol's smile widened. Or as I prefer to call him, the man who's been coasting off Renee's salary since the day she married him. More laughter. My stomach folded in on itself. I looked toward my daughter Renee, sitting 2 seats down. She laughed too. Quiet. Quiet. Brief. But I saw it, and I felt it land somewhere underneath my ribs, because Carol disliking me was nothing new. Renee laughing along was something else entirely. I dropped my eyes to the white tablecloth, the polished forks, a half-empty glass of sweet tea sweating onto a paper coaster. I'm 59 years old. I buried a wife, raised a daughter mostly alone, run a small electrical contracting business through 2 recessions, and walked away from one heart procedure with a stent and a new appreciation for mornings. None of that prepared me for how much a joke at my own daughter's rehearsal dinner could take out of a man. Carol wasn't finished. "I mean, look at him," she said, gesturing with her glass. "Moved into Renee's house the year her mother passed, and he's been there ever since. Pretty comfortable arrangement, if you ask me." More laughter, a little louder this time. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. If I'd opened my mouth right then, I don't know what would have come out, and a rehearsal dinner for my own daughter's wedding wasn't the place to find out. My right hip ached, the old injury from a fall off a ladder 15 years back, the kind of ache that shows up before weather changes. I reached for my tea and drank slow, giving myself something to do with my hands. Across the table, my future son-in-law, Marcus, looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Good kid. Quiet, steady, worked construction management for a firm downtown. I'd liked him from the first time Renee brought him home. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then closed it again, and I didn't blame him. Nobody wants to referee his own mother during a wedding rehearsal. The truth was, Carol and I had been circling each other for 2 years, ever since Renee and Marcus got serious. Little comments at first, a raised eyebrow when I mentioned I was retired, a pointed question about what exactly I did all day. I'd let it slide because that's what you do with future in-laws. You let things slide, you keep the peace, you tell yourself it doesn't matter. Sitting there that night, I understood that it had mattered the whole time, that every small comment had been stacking up somewhere inside me like firewood, dry and waiting. I looked around the room. Most of Marcus's family didn't know me beyond a handshake. Why would they? I wasn't the center of this wedding. I was just the bride's father, the widower, the guy who'd apparently been living soft off his own daughter. Easy story. People like easy stories, especially when somebody hands one to them at a dinner table. The truth is almost always more complicated, but nobody asks for the truth when the joke is already getting laughs. Carol finally sat down. Conversation picked back up around the table, careful and a little too bright. The way conversation gets after something uncomfortable happens, and everyone agrees silently to move past it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. And it wasn't really about Carol, it was about Renee. The image of her laughing kept replaying behind my eyes. Maybe she thought it was harmless. Maybe she figured I was tough enough to brush it off. Maybe she just didn't think about it at all, which somehow felt worse. I was tired of being the punchline in a story I'd never agreed to be part of. I reached for a roll from the breadbasket when I noticed movement at the end of the table. Marcus's father, Daniel, had gone still. He'd been quiet through the whole exchange, which I'd noticed because Daniel wasn't usually a quiet man. Now he set his glass down slowly, and the table noticed. Daniel wasn't dramatic. People paid attention when he moved like that. He looked straight at Carol, no anger on his face, just something heavier. Disappointment, maybe, the kind that's worse than shouting. "Carol," he said. The table went quiet. Even the server near the kitchen door stopped moving. Carol blinked at him. "What?" Daniel folded his hands on the table in front of him. Then he said something that made the hair stand up on my arms. I think you just said something you're going to regret. The room froze. Carol let out a nervous laugh. What are you talking about, Daniel? He didn't answer her. He looked at me instead, a long look, like he was turning something over in his mind, deciding something. Then he reached for the jacket hanging on the back of his chair. Marcus stood halfway up. Dad. Daniel didn't look at him. He slid one arm into the jacket, then the other unhurried, like a man finishing a thought before he speaks it out loud. The whole table watched. Nobody understood what was happening. I sure didn't. Finally, Carol spoke again, her voice smaller now. Did I say something wrong? Daniel turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at her one more time. More than you know, he said. Then he walked out. The door swung shut behind him. And real silence settled over the table, the kind where people suddenly find their drinks fascinating. Carol looked around, embarrassed now in a different way than before. Marcus looked confused. Renee looked worried, glancing between her plate and the door Daniel had just walked through. And I sat there with my heart going faster than it should have, because Daniel wasn't the type to make a scene. Not ever. In the 4 years I'd known him through Marcus and Renee's relationship, I'd watched him handle 2 business disputes and a family medical scare without raising his voice once. If he'd reacted like that, something else was sitting underneath Carol's joke, something I didn't understand yet. Dinner continued in a strange, careful rhythm after that. People talked, plates came and went, but the air in the room had changed temperature. Every few minutes I caught somebody glancing at me, then looking away fast when I noticed. Around 9, I quietly excused myself. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked where I was going. I walked through the hotel lobby alone, out into the parking lot where the Oklahoma night had cooled off fast, the way it does in early fall. I climbed into my truck, an old Silverado with 210,000 miles on it, and sat there a minute before turning the key. My phone stayed silent the whole drive home. No text from Renee. Nothing from Carol, which I didn't expect anyway. I pulled out onto the highway and let the road carry me. But my mind stayed back in that banquet room, circling Daniel's face, the way he'd stood up, the way he'd walked out without raising his voice once. And underneath all of it, one question kept surfacing. What did Daniel know that I didn't? I barely slept that night. Not because of Carol's joke, not even because of Renee's laugh. It was Daniel. I replayed those 2 minutes over and over. The stillness before he stood, the calm in his voice that somehow carried more weight than shouting would have. Most people would call that dramatic. That wasn't Daniel. He was the kind of man who thought before he spoke and fixed problems quietly, which was exactly why his reaction stuck with me like a splinter I couldn't find. By midnight, I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, the only light coming from the stove hood. Renee hadn't come home yet. She told me earlier she might stay at Marcus's place to help finish wedding favors, or maybe she just didn't want to drive home with me after what happened. I wasn't sure which possibility bothered me more. I poured a cup of decaf I didn't need and drank it anyway, listening to the refrigerator hum and the house settle around me. At 10:40, my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen a second before answering. Hey! His voice sounded tired. Walter. A pause. You home? Yeah. Another pause. We need to talk. Nothing else. No explanation. Just those 4 words sitting heavy on the line. My stomach tightened. About what? Not over the phone. Is everything all right? No. That got my attention fast. When? Tomorrow morning. Where? There's a diner on Route 9, the Roadhouse Grill. You know it. I did. Small place, mostly regulars, contractors and retirees, and a few long-haul drivers who stopped through on their way north. 8 o'clock, he said, then hung up before I could answer. I sat there holding the phone, and for the first time that whole night, Carol's joke wasn't what occupied my mind. Daniel was. The next morning I woke before the sun, hip aching. The kind of soreness that used to surprise me and now just felt like Tuesday. I showered, made coffee I didn't finish, and drove out toward Route 9 while the roads were still empty and the sky was doing that gray-orange thing it does before sunrise. The Roadhouse Grill looked exactly like it always had. Same chipped sign out front, same smell of bacon grease hitting you the second you open the door. Daniel was already in a booth by the window, black coffee in front of him, a newspaper folded but untouched beside his cup. He looked older than I remembered from the dinner the night before. Not weak, just worn in a way that comes from carrying something heavy. He nodded when I sat down. Morning. Morning. A waitress appeared almost immediately, refilling Daniel's cup before I'd even gotten settled. Coffee? Hun? Please. She walked off, and for a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then Daniel looked out the window at the parking lot. You know what bothered me most last night? He said. I waited. It wasn't what Carol said. I frowned. Then what was it? He turned back to face me. She believes it. That hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. This hadn't been a joke that landed wrong. Carol meant every word of it. Daniel leaned forward, forearms on the table. You know how many times Marcus has heard that story about you? What story? That you've been living off Renee since your wife passed. I went still. What? Months, Walter. Probably longer. I stared at him. You're kidding. I wish I was. My coffee arrived. I didn't touch it. Daniel kept going. At first we figured it was just Carol being Carol, family ribbing, that kind of thing. Then it kept coming up, at dinners, at the engagement party, here and there in conversation, until it stopped sounding like a joke and started sounding like something she believed. My stomach dropped. How often? Enough that Marcus mentioned it to me twice, worried about how it had looked to his side of the family. I looked down at the table. Somehow that hurt worse than the dinner itself, because a joke is one thing, but a story repeated enough times stops being a joke and becomes a belief, something people accept as fact without ever checking it. Daniel studied my face. You really didn't know? No. I figured as much, he said, and that's why I got up and left. Neither of us spoke for a minute. A waitress refilled coffee 2 booths down. Silverware clinked somewhere behind the counter. Life moved on around us while mine had quietly shifted under my feet. Finally, I asked the question I needed answered. What exactly has Carol been telling people? Daniel hesitated, then said, She talks like she's already planning around your money. What money? Renee's house? Your retirement account? All of it. I frowned, not understanding. I don't have much beyond the house and what I put away from the business. He shook his head slow. That's not what she's telling people. She's been saying Renee's been quietly supporting you for years, and that once the wedding happens and the families are tied together, there'll be more to go around. The property, the savings, eventually. I felt my chest go tight. The property? My property? He didn't answer right away, which told me everything. I could tell this wasn't something Daniel enjoyed saying out loud. He wasn't a man who liked repeating gossip. Last Thanksgiving, he continued, Carol mentioned you'd probably want to downsize eventually, sell the house, split whatever came from it. I let out a slow breath, the coffee suddenly tasting bitter in my mouth, because for the first time things started lining up. The expensive venue Renee had picked without blinking. The new car Carol drove. The casual way Carol talked about family money at every gathering, like it was already shared between us. Things I'd brushed off because I wanted peace. Things I'd excused because Renee seemed happy. Things I'd told myself didn't matter. Daniel looked at me steady. Walter. Yeah. She talks about your assets like they're already part of the family pot. There it was. The sentence that followed me out of that diner and stayed with me the rest of the day. Not Renee's assets. Mine. For 2 years I'd been painted as the freeloader, the man coasting off his daughter's paycheck, while somebody on the other side of this marriage had quietly been planning around what little I actually had. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud right there in the booth. Daniel watched me carefully. You all right? I nodded the automatic way men my age do, the way that means nothing and everything at once. The truth was no, I wasn't all right, not angry yet. Disappointed mostly, because I realized I didn't actually know what Renee thought of all this, whether she'd heard the same stories and stayed quiet, or whether she genuinely had no idea what Carol had been saying behind closed doors. We talked another half hour, old stories, the wedding, Marcus's job, nothing heavy. But my mind stayed somewhere else, running numbers, running years, running every quiet sacrifice I'd made since my wife died, and never once mentioned out loud. By the time I got home, the house was empty, Renee still wasn't back, and the silence felt different than it usually did. I walked into the small office off the kitchen, the room I used to pay bills and keep paperwork, and pulled open the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. If Carol thought my money was already half claimed by her family, I needed to understand exactly how much of my own life I'd already spent on Renee's. I started pulling folders before I'd even decided to. Not because I doubted what I'd find, but because I suspected I'd finally have to look at things I'd avoided looking at directly for years. The office was small, a desk my wife had picked out at an estate sale, a single bookshelf, a photo of my old four-man crew from a job we did on the county courthouse back in 2011. Most days I barely used the room since retiring. Some mornings I still woke at 5 expecting a job site call that never came. That morning, though, I wasn't retired in any sense that mattered. I felt like a man auditing his own life. I started with the wedding. The venue deposit alone, the one I'd paid without hesitation back in the spring, came to $18,000. I found the receipt, stared at the number a second, not with regret, just recognition. Because back then I'd been happy to do it, happy to give my only daughter the wedding she wanted after everything she'd been through since her mother passed. That's what a father does. Or at least, that's what I'd believed at the time. I entered the number into a spreadsheet and kept going. The next folder held records from the 2 years after my wife's funeral, when Renee had been finishing her degree and barely keeping her head above water emotionally. She'd called me crying one night, said she might have to drop out, couldn't cover the semester. I hadn't hesitated. $9,400, tuition and books. Next folder, a car repair after she hit a deer outside of town, $2,200. Next, a security deposit on her first apartment after a relationship ended badly, $3,000. Next, medical bills from an ER visit her insurance didn't fully cover, $5,800. I kept entering numbers, hour after hour, coffee going cold next to the keyboard. The spreadsheet kept growing, and by early afternoon my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with my heart procedure. Not because of the money, because of what each number represented. A phone call, a crisis, a moment where I'd shown up without question because that's what I thought love looked like. I remembered Renee thanking me, more than once, genuinely, in the years right after her mother died. She hadn't always carried herself the way she had at that rehearsal dinner. Something had shifted somewhere along the way, slow enough that I hadn't noticed it happening. Around 2 in the afternoon, I leaned back and looked at the total glowing on the screen. $194,300. I stared at it, looked away, looked back, same number. It wasn't a fortune by any stretch. I'd spent more than that on payroll some years running the business. That wasn't the point. The point was what I'd expected back, which wasn't gratitude exactly. Just basic respect, the kind that apparently cost more than money ever could. I pushed back from the desk and walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, stared inside without really seeing anything, closed it. Settled for a sandwich I barely tasted. Halfway through eating, my phone buzzed. An old friend named Patty, someone I'd known since my wife's church days, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business without trying. We talked for a few minutes, weather, the wedding, normal things. Then she said something that stopped me cold. You know, I always thought it was sweet how Renee's been taking care of you since Linda passed. I nearly dropped the sandwich. What? Patty went quiet a second, then sounded confused. Wait, isn't that what's been happening? I set the plate down slow. What exactly do you mean by that, Patty? She got uncomfortable fast, the way people do when they realize they've stepped somewhere they shouldn't have. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. No, I said, keeping my voice even. Tell me. She sighed. Carol's mentioned it a few times, that Renee's been helping you out financially since you retired, covering things. I stared through the kitchen window at the backyard, the swing set I'd never taken down even though Renee hadn't touched it in 20 years. My own reflection looked back at me in the glass, older than I remembered feeling that morning. Patty kept talking. Honestly, I figured everybody knew. I wasn't really listening anymore. Pieces were sliding into place, Carol's comments, the rehearsal dinner, the confidence behind that joke about me coasting off Renee's salary. The story hadn't started with Carol. It had started somewhere closer to home. Patty finally asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine and got off the phone as quick as I could without being rude. I sat at that kitchen table a long time after, not angry yet, just disappointed in a way that settled deep. Renee knew exactly where the money in this house came from. She knew who'd paid for her degree, her car repairs, half her early adult life. She knew the venue deposit had come out of my account, not the other way around. So why let people believe the opposite? The answer came slow. Not because she wanted to hurt me, because it was easier than correcting Carol. Easier than creating friction with her future mother-in-law 2 months before the wedding. Easier than saying, that's not true. My dad's not the one who needed help. I was. Sometimes people don't betray you with a lie. Sometimes they betray you by letting a lie grow comfortable in the room. Around 5, I heard Renee's car in the driveway, her key in the door, her footsteps in the kitchen. I stayed in the office, didn't move. A few minutes later, she knocked softly on the doorframe. "You okay, Dad?" I glanced at the spreadsheet still glowing on my screen. $194,300? For years, I'd told myself the cost didn't matter, that family was complicated, that patience fixed everything eventually. Patience only works when it runs both directions, and I wasn't sure anymore that it had. I minimized the window before she could see it. "Just going through some paperwork," I said. She nodded, said something about needing to finalize the seating chart, and walked off down the hall. I listened until her footsteps faded, then pulled the spreadsheet back up and stared at the number. Another long minute. Finally, I picked up my phone, not to call Renee, not to call Carol. Neither conversation would have gone anywhere good that night. I called my attorney instead, a guy named Russ I'd used for the business for 20 years. When he picked up, I didn't waste time. "Russ, I need you to look over everything tied to my estate, the house, the accounts, all of it." Quiet on the line a second. Then he said, "About time, Walter." I looked out at the backyard going dark, the swing set turning into a shadow. For the first time since the rehearsal dinner, I felt something other than humiliation settling into place. Not revenge, control. I didn't know exactly what came next, but I knew one thing for certain. In 3 days, there'd be a letter sitting on the kitchen counter, and after that, nothing in this house would feel the same. The letter wasn't dramatic. No accusations, no raised voice on paper, just one page, typed, plain, sitting on the counter where Renee would find it before I left for the morning. I drove to a different diner across town and ate breakfast alone, not avoiding her exactly, just needing a few quiet hours before whatever came next arrived. At 59, you learn that the decisions that matter most usually get made in silence. The shouting comes after. I sat in a booth nursing coffee, watching a couple of retired guys argue good-naturedly about the Thunder's chances this season, watching a trucker fold his newspaper with the kind of patience I admired. Normal life, the kind I wanted back. My phone started buzzing at 8:20. "Renee." I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 30 seconds later, then again. By the time I finished my eggs, she'd called 5 times. I listened to the voicemail walking back to my truck. "Dad, what is this? What does this letter mean? Call me back, please." I stood by the truck a minute, looking at the gray sky, then put the phone away without calling back yet. No satisfaction in it, just certainty. Because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I'd actually said exactly what I meant. The letter laid it out plain. Effective immediately, I would no longer be covering wedding expenses beyond what I'd already paid. I would no longer be a backup source of funds for unexpected costs. Future help, if there was any, would be discussed and agreed on beforehand, not assumed. I explained why, not because of one joke at a rehearsal dinner, but because I'd finally understood that generosity without any boundary eventually turns into expectation, and expectation eventually turns into entitlement, and I'd let that happen slowly enough that nobody, including me, had noticed it happening. I got home around 10. Renee was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, the letter in her hand, her face pale in a way that wasn't anger, more like fear. "Tell me this isn't serious, Dad." I set my keys on the counter. "It's serious. You're pulling money 3 weeks before the wedding. I'm ending arrangements that should have ended a long time ago." Her eyes went wide. "That's not the same thing." "It is, actually." Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then she shook her head. "This is about what Carol said at dinner." "No, it's not. Come on, Dad." "No," I said again, firmer. She threw the letter down on the counter. "Then what is it?" The answer came easier than I expected. 2 years, I said. 2 years I've been trying to be treated decently by your future mother-in-law, and somewhere along the way I found out you've let her believe I'm the one who's been living off you. Renee's face changed, just slightly, but I caught it. "What people? The people who think you've been supporting me since your mother died." Her expression shifted into something closer to recognition than surprise. I waited. Finally, she said, "I made jokes, Dad. They were harmless." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because that word had stopped meaning anything to me. Harmless. Just like Carol's comment last night, just like every comment before it, all harmless, all adding up to something that wasn't harmless at all. Renee looked exhausted suddenly. "I never thought it mattered." "It mattered," I said, quieter than I meant to. And that landed on her harder than if I'd shouted. Her phone rang. Carol's name on the screen. Renee answered, and I could hear Carol's voice before the phone even reached her ear, loud, panicked. "What is he doing?" Renee closed her eyes. "Mom, please!" I walked out of the kitchen, not because I was scared of the conversation, but because I already knew how it would go. The rest of that day followed a pattern I'd been expected. Calls, texts, more calls. Renee called me 11 times. I noticed without meaning to count. By evening, I hadn't answered any of them. Around 6, a different name lit up my screen. Marcus. I stared at it a second, then picked up. "Hey." His voice sounded nervous. "Mr. Boone." "Walter's fine, Marcus." "Okay, Walter." Long pause. "Can we talk?" Unlike Renee, he sounded embarrassed, almost ashamed. "Sure." He exhaled hard. "Look, I don't know everything that's going on between you and Renee, but I think there's something you should know." I sat down at the kitchen table. "What?" Renee assumed the wedding budget was fully covered no matter what came up. "I figured as much," I said. "There's some stuff she hasn't told you about." Silence a second. "The reception venue, specifically." I closed my eyes. "What about it?" "She upgraded it last month, the package with the extra hour and the string quartet without telling you." "Using what money?" More silence, which was its own kind of answer. "She assumed you'd handle the difference," Marcus finally said. I leaned back, looking at the ceiling fan turning slow overhead. The entitlement wasn't shocking anymore. What shocked me was how normal it had apparently become to everyone but me. Then Marcus said something that mattered more. "There's something else, Walter." My stomach tightened. "What?" "My mom's been talking about your house." I sat up straight. "What about it?" "She tells people Renee's going to end up with it eventually, once you're older, that it'll basically become part of our place since we're moving in close by." I let out a short, humorless laugh, because Marcus didn't know what Carol apparently didn't either. That house had been in my wife's family for 3 generations before we ever lived in it, and the deed was set up so it would pass to a trust benefiting a local children's hospital, something Linda and I had decided together years before she got sick, something Renee had been told about more than once, and apparently chosen to forget or never mentioned to anyone on Marcus's side. Marcus sounded genuinely uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, man." "Don't be," I said. "I don't think she understands how this looks from the outside." "Neither do I admitted, and meant it. After we hung up, I sat there a long while, not thinking about money anymore, thinking about motive. The rehearsal dinner made sense now. The wedding spending made sense. The casual assumptions about my house and my future made sense. Renee hadn't just been letting people disrespect me. She'd been letting people build plans around resources that were never going to be there the way they imagined. And when people believe something already belongs to them, they get furious the moment a boundary shows up reminding them otherwise. That night, Renee sent one text, 5 words. "We need to talk, publicly." I read it twice, then set the phone down, because for the first time in this whole mess, I knew exactly what was coming. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to back down from it. The invitation showed up 4 days later, not a text, an actual card, heavy stock, gold script along the border. Renee had titled it, "A Celebration of New Beginnings." I almost laughed reading it, not because it was funny, because by then I understood exactly what it was for. She wanted an audience. She wanted enough eyes in the room that I'd feel cornered into backing down rather than embarrass her in front of everyone. The event was set for a Saturday evening at the Larkspur Vent Hall, 20 minutes from downtown, the same venue Marcus had warned me about, the one Renee had upgraded without asking. I nearly didn't go. Staying home would have been easier, simpler, the path of least resistance I'd been walking for 2 years. But avoiding it wouldn't have ended anything, just delayed it. So I put on my one good blazer and drove out there. The hall was packed, more people than I expected, co-workers, extended family, neighbors from Marcus's side I'd never met. Renee moved through the crowd, greeting people warmly, working the room the way a politician works a fundraiser. Marcus, by contrast, looked like a man waiting for a verdict. When he spotted me, relief crossed his face for half a second. "Glad you came, Walter." "Not sure I am," I said, and that earned the first real smile I'd seen out of him in weeks. The hall itself was nice, string lights, fresh flowers everywhere, the kind of arrangements that don't come cheap. And after 30 years running a contracting business, I could eyeball a budget without trying. Every time I scanned the room, the same thought surfaced. She expected me to cover this. Not hoped. Expected. I found a seat near the back, away from the small stage set up near the front, exactly where I wanted to be. For about 40 minutes, things stayed normal. Music playing soft, people chatting, drinks circulating. Then Renee stepped up to the small podium and tapped her glass, and the room quieted down. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she started, and polite applause followed. "I want this evening to be about gratitude," she said. And I knew immediately that was a bad sign, because in my experience, speeches about gratitude rarely go well when they follow weeks of unspoken tension. "Especially gratitude toward the people who've supported us," Renee continued. And a few heads turned my direction, not many, just enough. My stomach sank. "Here we go." She kept talking, sincere at first, her voice shifting subtle and gradual, the way a car drifts across a lane line without the driver quite noticing. "Unfortunately," she said, "sometimes people walk away from family right when they're needed most." The room went quieter. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, like he already knew where this was headed. Renee looked directly at me. There it was. No more hiding behind jokes. A direct shot in front of 100 people. "I've learned recently that some people are only generous when it benefits them," she said. A murmur moved through the crowd, confusion more than agreement, because most of these people had no context for what she was saying. Renee pushed forward anyway. When someone suddenly pulls support right before a wedding, Marcus stood up. "Renee," he said. She ignored him. It says a lot about a person's character. The room had gone completely silent now. I could feel eyes moving back and forth between us, waiting for a reaction I wasn't going to give, because sometimes silence reveals more than any response could. Renee mistook my quiet for weakness. "Big mistake. Families shouldn't get abandoned just because feelings get hurt," she said. And that was the line, not because it insulted me, because it rewrote what had actually happened. I hadn't abandoned anyone. I'd stopped funding people who'd started believing my money belonged to them by default. Before I could even consider responding, another voice cut through the room. "That's enough, Renee." Every head turned. Daniel stood slowly from a table near the front, no microphone, no theatrics, just a steady 64-year-old man with a glass of iced tea in his hand. Carol looked over, annoyed rather than worried. "Daniel," she started. "No," he said, his voice not loud but carrying anyway, because the room had already gone quiet. "You've had your turn." Renee stared at him, stunned. Daniel looked around the hall, then back at her. "I've spent the last week hearing different versions of who this man is," he said, nodding toward me, and almost none of it was true. "Nobody moved," Daniel continued. "Walter never asked me for a dime." Silence. "He never borrowed from anyone in this family." More silence. "He never used anybody, not once in 4 years of knowing him." He paused, then added, "The truth is closer to the opposite. People were paying real attention now, not gossip attention, the dangerous kind." Daniel told the story, the actual one, how I'd quietly co-signed a loan for Marcus's first work van 2 years back when the bank turned him down. Never told a soul, never mentioned it again, never used it as leverage in a single conversation since. The room listened. I watched Renee's confidence drain out of her face in real time. Then Marcus stood up too, which surprised everyone, including me. "I need to say something," he said. Renee turned, alarmed. "No, Marcus." He kept going anyway, looking out at the crowd. "Walter never promised us unlimited money," he said. Silence. "He helped because he cared, not because he owed us anything." More. Silence. "We made assumptions," Marcus said, his voice catching slightly. "That's on us, not him." The words landed hard, because nobody expects honesty to show up in the middle of a public scene, especially honesty that cost the person saying it. Renee looked horrified. The room looked stunned. Then came the part nobody saw coming. A man in a dark suit approached the podium, the venue coordinator, mid-30s, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. He leaned in and said something quiet to Renee. Her face changed color instantly. I recognized that look from contractors who just realized a job had gone underwater. Renee whispered something back. He shook his head. She whispered again, more urgent. He shook his head again, then handed her a folded paper. The room watched, not understanding, but I did. The upgrade balance, due in full, never paid. Renee opened the paper, read it, and went pale in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. For 1 second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the rehearsal dinner, 2 years of comments, the assumptions about my house, the public scene she'd engineered specifically to corner me. The coordinator stepped back quietly. Renee stood frozen at the podium, the microphone still in her hand, nothing left to say, because reality had finally caught up to her, and reality doesn't negotiate. A few uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the crowd, then more. Nobody laughing, nobody mocking, just people quietly realizing the story they'd been told wasn't the real one. Renee handed the microphone to someone nearby and walked off fast, almost running. Carol followed her out. The hall stayed silent a long moment before conversation slowly resumed, like weather passing through. Daniel sat back down. Marcus lowered his head into his hands. I stayed exactly where I was at the back table, hands folded, not triumphant, just tired, because after weeks of this, something in me finally settled. I figured the worst of it was over. I had no idea the hardest part was still ahead of me. The days after that party, the house stayed quiet in a way that wasn't peace, just emptiness. Renee stayed at a friend's place for nearly a week, officially to give everyone space, though I suspected she also needed time away from questions neither of us wanted to answer yet. I didn't push. At my age, you learn some conversations can't be rushed. People arrive at the truth in their own time, or they don't arrive at all. The first morning alone, I woke at 5 out of habit, 31 years of early job sites built into my body whether I needed it anymore or not. I sat on the back porch with coffee, watched the sun come up over the fence line, a rabbit working through the yard, a neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the road. Small, ordinary things I used to rush past when life was busier. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself admit I was lonely. Not because Renee was angry, but because I'd spent 2 years trying to earn a place in my own daughter's life that should never have needed earning. A few days later, Daniel called, and we met back at the same diner on Route 9. He slid into the booth and studied my face a second. "You look tired, Walter." "I am." That actually made him laugh. Fair enough. We talked about ordinary things first. The business, his knees, the Thunder's playoff chances. Eventually, he turned serious. "You good with how it all played out?" I thought about it longer than he probably expected. "Honestly, I don't know," I said, and that was the truth. People think standing up for yourself feels like winning. Movies teach you that. Real life felt more like setting down something heavy and immediately noticing how tired your arms still were from carrying it so long. Daniel nodded like he'd expected exactly that answer. "That's probably a good sign," he said. "How's that? If you were enjoying this too much, I'd worry about you." I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. The wedding got postponed, not canceled, officially due to family circumstances, a phrase nobody believed but nobody questioned either. A month passed, then 2. Summer eased into fall. Renee eventually came home. The first night back, we sat at the kitchen table after dinner. No television on, just the two of us at the same table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals over the years. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Renee said, "Quiet, I let you down, Dad." The words just sat there a second. I should have corrected people, years ago. I looked down at my coffee. I know. Her eyes filled, not dramatic tears, the quiet kind. "I kept choosing the easy version of things," she said. I didn't answer right away because she was right. The easy joke, the easy silence whenever Carol said something off. All those small choices adding up over time into something much bigger than any single moment. "I never thought it'd get this far," she said. "Neither did I told her. And for the first time in weeks, it felt like we were finally talking about the actual problem. Not money, not the wedding, respect. A relationship survives mistakes easier than it survives quiet contempt. And thankfully, Renee understood that now. Healing wasn't instant. Nothing at our age ever is. Trust doesn't come back the way you'd replace a cracked window. It takes time and consistency, and the kind of slow work that never makes for a good story, but matters more than anything dramatic ever could. Carol stayed distant much longer, nearly a year. And honestly, I wasn't sure I'd hear from her again at all. Then one Sunday afternoon, my phone rang, her name on the screen. I stared at it a second before answering. "Hello." Silence then. "Hi, Walter." She sounded different, older somehow, not physically. Something underneath her voice had shifted. We talked almost an hour, not about the wedding, not about money, mostly about ordinary things, mortgage rates, her knee surgery, how fast kids grow up even when they're already adults. Eventually, she got quiet, then said something I'd stopped expecting to hear. "I'm sorry, Walter. Not polished, not rehearsed, just honest. I was wrong about you." I looked out the kitchen window at the same yard where I'd once sat staring at a spreadsheet full of numbers that used to mean something different to me. "I know," I said, and somehow that was enough for both of us. We didn't become close overnight, that's not how it works. But things got better slowly, carefully, with actual boundaries this time. The biggest change wasn't financial, it was in how we talked to each other. No more assumptions, no more automatic rescues, no more treating generosity like something owed. If help was needed, we talked about it first. If support was given, it got acknowledged instead of expected. Simple rules, the kind I should have set years before any of this happened. Looking back, I don't regret a dollar I spent on Renee. Not the tuition, not the venue deposit, not any of it. Money comes and goes. That was never the real cost. What I regret is letting people believe my kindness had no limits. Because the moment you stop drawing a line, people quietly stop seeing the sacrifice in what you give them and start seeing it as something they were always entitled to receive. That's a dangerous lesson to teach anyone, especially the people you love most. These days, the house stays quieter, not perfectly, just healthier. The older I get, the more I understand that peace isn't something you stumble into, it's something you protect on purpose. Sometimes by saying yes, sometimes by saying no, and sometimes by finally standing up for yourself after years of staying quiet to keep everyone else comfortable. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people who actually show up for you. Setting good boundaries isn't coldness, it's one of the kindest things you can do for the people you love. Walter didn't stop giving because he stopped caring. He stopped giving blindly because he finally understood that real generosity needs to be seen for what it is, not taken for granted. When you protect your dignity, you actually teach the people around you how to love you better. And that's worth more than any amount of money ever could be. A small note for you, this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment while leaving behind a little something worth carrying into your own life.